parts of, or some important elements of the results, especially presenting results. Last week, Eduardo talked a little bit about the discussion section, and today we're going to conclude. We have more things to talk about in the coming weeks, but today kind of represents the end of the main sections. So you have to, after the end of today, you will have an overview of what the main ingredients, expected ingredients are of a basic research article. Okay, back to our calendar now. We are here, and as you see here, next week there's no class. There's not no class because I'm going on vacation to Hawaii. It's because we're giving you some time to write. Obviously, you need some time to write because it is expected that on the 31st, Halloween, that you have as much as you can ready. Now, some of you will not have anything ready for a discussion section, or that's fine. But the idea is that on this date, on the 31st, that you'll have the opportunity to receive feedback from somebody that you don't know, that will look at your article and, as much as you have, to give you some feedback on it. Writing is a process, and getting some feedback and giving feedback will be part of that process. So I'll give you some more information about that later today. Also on this date, on the 31st, we're going to be talking about plagiarism. And we're going to have a special guest speaker who is going to talk about his experience with an article of his that was rejected because of plagiarism. And it's an important topic. It's one that has become more and more discussed, in part because software to detect plagiarism has become more and more efficient and more rigid. And that's it for the coming weeks. Okay, so your introductions are looking really, really good, and we're working on those, and it is expected that you will receive feedback on those introductions by the 7th of November as planned. Many of them have been finished already, but we're going to give them back to you all at once, or else it's just not fair. Now, I mentioned the introduction because it is important, I think, to step back a little bit and remember that there is a relationship between the introduction and the discussion section. And just like there's a relationship, a link between all those sections. And I want to remind you of that today and some specific points. So here's your IMRAD, and as you can see, you start an introduction more broadly, kind of establishing a territory, then delimiting it to your space, your specific study, and your specific method, and then bringing it back out again to your discussion. But it is important today to remember, we'll talk about this, how you should bring things back to points raised in the introduction. I want to show you an example of somebody, an example of somebody who did this quite effectively, linking the introduction section to the discussion. I'm going to show you this example in a second. This is just to remind you that these two things here, the discussion section, where we talked about already a little bit last week, was a section that was pointed out by authors as being really a main factor for rejection. And it's important to highlight this overstating the importance of findings. And we're going to come back to this point later today. And it's easy to see why that happens, because especially less experienced researchers, you guys, most of you are doing your master's and your doctoral degrees, and you spend so much time working on that you don't want to see any defect in that. And you want to show how important it's really important to you. You kind of sense it. It might be a little bit sensitive about your research. It kind of reminds me of parents who have their first child. The first child can't do any wrong. You know, the first baby of parents, the parents take like 1 million photographs of the child, and the second baby is like, 3 pictures. Already been, but the first one, which is for a lot of you, you're producing your first baby, your first big baby now, your dissertations and your thesis. It's hard not to overstate the importance of that, but there's a danger there, and we're going to talk about how you can be cautious and be aware of that and fix that problem. But also, another element that was really stood out in these papers here as being factors contributing to rejection are these two here: nothing new or contribution not clear. And there is a link between this and the discussion, and it is important to make this really clear in the introduction, obviously, but also to maybe start to think about how is this linked to the discussion. So here's an example. This is from a student here, Glaucia. There are several examples. I chose this one because it's really good. Also, it fits quite well onto one slide. And as a general rule of thumb, I would just kind of parenthetically say that sometimes the best introductions were like the ones that got to the point fastest, that didn't go long, that those often receive the highest grades. If you look at, we could look at a correlation between word count and grade, but often if you look at the grade that was received on your introductions, there is some kind of relationship between the length of the introduction and the grade received. Correlation does not equal causation, but it's something to keep in mind. If your introduction is very long, then maybe should look at it again. Anyway, so this student here, Glaucia, she is doing research in it's the name escaped me. It's the program is public policy. Yes, public policy. And just a few things to point out here. First of all, you have your typical well done territory. This is also what John Swales calls, beyond establishing territory, also calls this claiming centrality. This is saying basically this is an important area. I'll let you read that there about policy transfer. Okay, establish territory, and then problematizes that territory in the next sentence here. Key word here is this word concern. As an area of knowledge and development, there is concern about the establishment of theoretical frameworks and conceptual reviews, and supports that statement with the literature. There's this concern. It's not just her saying that. Okay, and then very quickly gets to the main point, her space here. Difficulties faced in demonstrating empirically a policy diffusion transfer process, yet articles with this aim are a minority in studies of policy transfer and diffusion. This key word here, yet, which is synonymous with however. So already in the first paragraph, she gets to the move number 2, establishing her niche right there. Okay, so that was very effective. But in addition to that, in the next paragraph, she talks about already stuff that could go in, she's going to revisit in the discussion section, probably. So she talks about the gap again. Since there is a gap in terms of methodological aspects, the objective of this article is to identify which are the frequently used tools in order to demonstrate empirically public policy transfer and/or diffusion. For reaching this objective, we have decided to do a meta-analysis of a list of 100 articles and 100 articles with the highest impact factor in Web of Science database. The mapping of these methodological tools might help these scholars that are starting in this field as well as in the development of future studies. So not only is she pointing out what's new here, she points out what's new, or what's new about this article, because there's this gap. She also talks about the importance, she emphasizes the importance of it by pointing out applications. So mentioning the word tools that can help those scholars, and also talks about how this can contribute to future studies. So in the lingo of last week, she's already talking about, already forecasting the application of the research and how this can contribute to furthering the future development of the field. This adds strength to her, it sells her research even better, because not only is there a gap, but she's saying, well, you know, this research will contribute to the area, so that's nice. So there are a lot of these things here that are linked, and we're going to look at these today. We just saw this, that it's important to talk about what's new or what the contribution is. But today, you're going to also see that this is linked to overstating the importance of findings and even transparency and issues of the method. Do you remember these symbols from last week? The first one, see if you can remember. Try to remember. You don't have to say anything, just, you know, get your brain working a little bit. This one was revisiting points raised in the introduction. That's a common thing that happens in a discussion. This next one here, this one is comparing your discussion and of your results with other studies. This one here is expanding or explaining or extrapolating on the results. This little wrench here is about the applications and practical implications. And then this one we're going to talk about a little bit today too, about limitations, another very common thing in the discussion. And finally, how the study advances the area, what is still needed. Okay, I'm putting this here as a reminder so you can remember what these symbols mean. So last week, you were asked to look at the discussion section of that article that was rejected and look at what was present and what was missing of those 6 elements. And basically everybody here identified the problem. Just to remind you, this was discussed last week, and they talked about the methods. They talked about figures, but they also said the results should justify the interpretations and conclusions. However, they were just pointed out and not discussed at all. And I'm pretty sure Eduardo told you that this is a really common thing that happens. Just mentioning, this is what we did, and that's it. So one of the students here from, I don't remember if it was from the distance one or the present one, this is what she said, and you can read that for yourselves. So this is really, really common, just this impression of just an explanação dos resultados. In part, I think that it's simply a matter of the people when they produce their results, when they have their results, they're just kind of, okay, well, here it is, done my job, and they don't know what to do in the discussion section. They don't know what's expected from me. How do I critically discuss my results? So this is why we're taking 2 days really to discuss the discussion section, because it's probably the section that is least talked about in terms of what should be a part of it. What are the ingredients that can help you produce a discussion section that won't contribute to a rejection? So there's that. But also, here's another example that's relevant. And so this person who wrote this talked about that the 6 ingredients, the 6 components of discussion section were missing or very limited, but also points out that I think this person is from the same area or a similar area as the author of the paper. Said, well, they talk about that of the 9 tested compositions, just 1 showed promising results. I don't know how true that is, but that's the impression that the person had. And yet this limitation, this apparent limitation, was not acknowledged by the author or the authors. So I think it goes back to that whole notion of, hey, this is my baby, this is my first child. I don't want to show any defects in it. But ironically, showing awareness of some of the limitations, and every study has limitation, can strengthen a paper. Of course, if it's a really bad limitation, or not a limitation, a defect in the methodology, and then there's no point. It won't get published, there's a problem. But every study has a limitation, and being aware of those limitations can strengthen the paper and also help disarm reviewers a little bit. Okay, so I want to stress that today that limitations are not necessarily defects. Limitations, every study has one. They're like belly buttons. Every study has a limitation, and don't be afraid to look critically. If you can't look critically at your own work and show that you're aware that it's not perfect, that actually can weaken your paper and embolden the critical naysayer. This guy here, who is ever present and should always be present on your mind. When you're writing, this is the guy that with almost every sentence, perhaps every word, you should be thinking of, thinking, how is the naysayer going to read this sentence? How is the naysayer going to read this claim? And I'm gonna mention this again later in today's class. One thing that you can suggest to your advisors, your orientadores, is to ask to be part of the review process if you aren't already. A lot of senior researchers, a lot of your advisors, because they publish probably a lot in many cases, they also receive a lot of invitations from good journals often to review manuscripts. Many cases, those people will say, look, I don't have time. Sometimes don't even answer the email. But one thing that you can suggest is, hey, Professor Fulano, next time you receive an invitation for a manuscript, and I know that you don't have any time to do it, why don't you pass it on to me and maybe other students, and we'll review it. Because then you can start to feel what it's like to be a reviewer of a live manuscript, and start to see, if you are being asked, if you are in the position, the role of trying to find the problems in the method of a manuscript, then you begin to become aware when you're writing yourselves of what to avoid. I know that many of you already do this in seminars where you look at manuscripts and you critique them, but usually those manuscripts are not manuscripts, they're published articles. Many of you already do this discussing articles in your classes, but I'm talking about manuscripts that haven't been decided on yet, that haven't been rejected or accepted or whatever. This is much more fun and can help you grow this awareness. I'll mention this again later. This is a journal that deals with medical and physiochemical issues, the Annals of Internal Medicine. And in this case, they're talking about the relationship of coffee consumption and mortality. But what I want to talk about is that this journal, like many journals these days, especially in the area of health and medicine, not only do you have your typical sections of background and objective and design, already you're supposed to put this in the abstract. This is called a structured abstract. In this journal, like many journals in this field, they also already ask you to acknowledge your limitations. I point this out to show you that it's not like, oh, every article that you write should be perfect. No, many journals now, they're actually even obliging the authors to show what is the limitation. Obviously, in the field of medicine and health, this can be of vital importance. But it should be important in all fields. In this case, the limitation is that coffee consumption was estimated from self-report. Thus, some measurement error is inevitable because you're dealing with human judgment. So, every paper does have a limitation, and in fact, sometimes you have to put that limitation in. There's an article that's already on our website. It's there. There's a link to it. I think if you look up in that section where there's a bibliography, it's Territ et al. The title, All That Glitters Isn't Gold. I think you have an expression like this in Portuguese too. A survey on acknowledgement of limitations in biomedical studies. I recommend you look at this paper if you have interest, because they talk about, one of their findings is actually that research that is sponsored by corporations, so private industry, they tend to acknowledge limitations less frequently than research that is done through non-funded, or rather not privately funded studies. But beyond that, they show how people do acknowledge their limitations. We're going to talk about that today as well. And of course, in that study, it would be strange if they didn't. They also talk about background, objective design results, and of course, the limitations. I asked you to read an article for today, or not read it, sorry. I sent you an article for today. It's available online. I'll show you in a minute. Just in case you have problems accessing this here in the auditorium, I sent you the link, and I think you sent the link and the PDF to it. I chose this particular article because it does have some good examples of discussing results, but also because I just thought the article was really funny. This article really caught my eye because, for many reasons, as you'll see in a second, the effect of meat consumption on body odor attractiveness. This is the good news is, if you're a vegetarian, this is good news for you. If you eat meat, there's not good news in this article for you, or at least if you're hunting for a partner, it's not good news for you. Yeah, so this is the image that came to my mind, when I was reading this article. Just to remind you, the abstract basically is auxiliary body odor, in other words, stinky armpits, is individually specific and potentially a rich source of information. Parenthetically, you guys, Portuguese is very interesting because you seem to be more aware of different smells than other cultures, because you have names for different things. So like bad breath, we just say what it is, bad breath, but you have a specific name for it, bafo, And then even for bad underarm smell, I think, was it like kachinga or something, or sese, or I don't know. You have all, and then for bad foot smell, you've got choulet. So like, you guys are more sensitive, you're more hygienic than other cultures, I think, or something. But anyway, so maybe if they had different participants measuring the odor, maybe Brazilians, they would have had different results. But anyway, rich source of information about its producer. Odor individuality partly results from genetic individuality, but the influence of ecological factors such as eating habits are another main source of odor variability. However, and here's the move to the rub, we know very little about how particular dietary components shape our body odor. This is interesting. And we kind of anecdotally, we know that, like if I eat a lot of curry, I might smell like curry. If I eat a lot of onions, I might smell like onions, but there's not very little research on this. Here, we tested the effect of red meat consumption on body odor attractiveness. We used a balance within subject experimental design. 17 male odor donors. I think this is hilarious. Odor donors. They're not participants, they're odor donors. Like, are you a blood donor? No, I'm an odor donor. Odor donors were on meat or non-meat diet for 2 weeks, wearing auxiliary pads, which is, I just can't imagine these guys wearing these pads as they're walking around, producing their samples to collect body odor during the final 24 hours of the diet. Fresh odor samples were assessed for their pleasantness, attractiveness, masculinity, and intensity by 30 women not using hormonal contraceptives. In other words, they wanted to know if the women found the smell attractive or not. But they repeated the procedure a month later with the same odor donors, each on the opposite diet than before. So they counterbalanced. Results of repeated measures analysis of variance showed that the odor donors, when on the non-meat diet, was judged as significantly more attractive, more pleasant, and less intense. This suggests that red meat consumption has a negative impact on perceived body. And there are a bunch of men here right now. They're, oh man, I'm going to get vegetarian tomorrow. I'm going vegan. Now, I talk about that so that you can remember, importantly, what the context of the study is and some specifics, because you're going to see that today you'll see some relationship between the introduction, the method, and discussion. So here is the introduction section, and they talk about, however, this is from the introduction, however, not only is body odor pre-programmed by genetic factors, but also much variability is due to psychophysiological and ecological influences. So they're talking about really their niche here. And here is an important thing. Oops. Yeah. However, very little is known about the effect of individual alimentary components on human body odor. Okay. And then here in the part in blue. For instance, it has been shown repeatedly that body odor changes across women's menstrual cycle, peaking in attractiveness around the time of ovulation. Okay. This is more than just an example of psychophysiological and ecological influences. They're mentioning this because it is a variable that first of all, they know they have to be aware of. Second of all, it's a variable that they know that the journal reviewers are aware of. In other words, naysayers. And it's a variable that they know, therefore, that they're going to have to control for. They know that, and they're already mentioning it here in the literature review, that this is an important variable, and they acknowledge that. Okay. Also, other studies found that mood of a target person may influence hedonic perception of his auxiliary odor. In other words, can influence whether the person smells bad or not. So both these things, they're not there by accident. They're there because the person is already saying, okay, we are aware of these two variables. We're aware of these variables. And they're not leaving it there. They'll pick them up again. So then they talk about the raters. And the raters were 32 female students. They talk about their characteristics, their profile. And And they mention here this thing again. So this is in the method section. And here they pick it up again. None of the women were using hormonal contraception. All reported having normal menstrual cycle length. To minimize the possible effect of menstrual cycle on the rater's olfactory sensitivity. So they're already saying, okay, we controlled for this variable. We talked about it. We know that it's there. And this is funny. The raters were not paid. However, they received a perfume tester after the first session and a 100-gram chocolate bar after the second session. Boy, I would do it for that. The first one. The first word for attendance today is paragraph. Paragraph. I can't keep serious, you guys laughing all the time. Paragraph. So those are already there because they've anticipated there's a person who's going to say, okay, I know that menstrual cycle can affect the perception of attractiveness. So they're saying, I'm aware of this guy here. Now we get to the discussion section. And here, where many authors would stop is here. Many authors would submit an article and they would say this. The results of the study show for the first time that red meat consumption may have a perceivable impact on auxiliary body odor. Odors of donors on the non-meat diet were judged as more pleasant, more attractive, and less intense. And then many authors would stop. But these ones, they say, because they're aware of the naysayer, they say, this pattern was not influenced by raters' menstrual cycle phase or partnership status. So saying that we are aware of this, we control for it, and we are pointing this out. Oops. So we're going to talk about this guy some more right now. In the discussion section that you were sent, rather in the articles that you were sent, I'd like you to do the following. Simply underline or highlight parts that were probably written thinking of the naysayer. So in other words, imagine the author or the authors writing the paper, and parts where you think, they put this in here because they are aware that this part here, if they don't show they're aware of it, could cause problems. And then when you're done, compare with others. As I mentioned, I sent this to you by email, but if you haven't received it for whatever reason, you can also find it online. Under today's class, module 9, sorry, here, the effect of meat consumption on body odor attractiveness. You just click on that if you don't have it already. And it should take you to the article, yes, right here, the article in the journal Chemical Senses. All right, so for now, I'd like you to work on that. Just simply underline or highlight parts that you think, this is because they were thinking of the naysayer. I'll give you about 5 minutes to do that. Just the discussion section. Okay. You probably have found a couple examples already. I just wanted to revisit this because this is really hilarious too, because this personal communication, you may have seen it before when someone cites a reference, but I've never seen it quite like this. Some folk beliefs connect odor hedonicity with meat consumption. For instance, Hindu Indians, who are usually vegetarian, say that people who eat meat smell bad because of it. S. Komarak, personal communication. I was just trying to imagine the personal communication there. Like, was the guy sent a WhatsApp message saying, you know what? I think people who eat meat smell bad. And then he just cites them. I think that's hilarious. All right. So here are some examples, and you may have found others, but here, as we just mentioned, the authors go back to the issue method mentioned in the method and introduction that menstrual cycle can influence the perception of smell. But this person who wrote this article was very aware of the naysayer because, for example, imagined, the naysayer saying, what about the sample size? It was only, 17 people or something. So, anticipating that, they say, the number of odor donors was relatively small. And then, however, the nature of the experiment was balanced and within subject. In other words, each rater assessed some donors in meat condition and some donors first in non-meat. Moreover, the diet we prescribed to our odor donors was identical except the meat content. Fried pork steak with potatoes, fried Edam cheese with potatoes. This gives us high confidence that our results are due to the studied effect and not due to some other variable. So the person saying, okay, I'm already anticipating as the person's writing. The person writing, is already, the person writing is already anticipating this objection or this critique, but immediately admits it. This admitting is also called a concession. So what the person is doing here is making a concession. And this is a very effective technique in the discussion section. Is anticipating what a possible critique or problem that the naysayer or any reviewer might identify and point out, and put that in the text. In other words, this person is putting the naysayer in the text. He's addressing the naysayer directly, saying, I already can hear you asking me about the relatively small sample, but I'm putting this first, and so I'm already disarming you. I'm already saying, I know you're going to say this, but here's what I have to say about it. They're making a concession. Again, this can be a very powerful tool in the discussion section. Similarly, the writer probably anticipated, but what about mood? You mentioned in the introduction that mood can influence. And also you have to remember that a lot of people don't even read an introduction. When they pick up an article, they may read just the results or just the discussion section. So the authors are careful here, and they say, theoretically, our diet may have influenced the mood of the donors, which may in turn have an impact on quality of body odor. They're admitting this, but that's theoretically. However, this is probably not the case, as we did not find differences in self-rated stress, fatigue, and mood between meat and non-meat condition. The reliability of the results is also supported by the fact that mean ratings across the two sessions were not significantly different, and that there was no change in masculinity rating across the experimental conditions. So this is a kind of concession as well. It's also called hypothetical real, that they're putting this hypothetical possibility in there, theoretical, because they're aware of this guy. the naysayer. And then they're countering that. Another example. They might think, but wait a minute. Is it the meat or is it the protein? Because what if it's, any kind of protein, the energy content? And he says, potentially, our findings may be the result of different energetic values. In other words, our diet only differed in meat content and therefore in energetic value. Thus, this factor can be responsible for the effect, not the meat per se. However, if this would be the case, one may expect diet of higher energetic value, i.e. meat diet, to be more attractive, as we found in the Bank-Vol study. Our results show higher attractiveness in the non-meat diet, and we therefore believe that it is caused by the meat effect specifically. So again, a concession, hypothetical, real. Putting the naysayer right there, saying, I hear you, naysayer, but I'm already disarming you. You're saying that maybe it's just the protein, but we're saying it's the meat because of this. Naysayer might say, but they're talking about quantitative changes, not qualitative changes. But then they say, one may argue, and who's the one? One is this guy. One may argue that the higher attractiveness of donors on the non-meat diet is due to quantitative rather than qualitative changes in their auxiliary odor. In our view, however, meat consumption changes the composition of some auxiliary chemicals, and therefore we believe that both changes of quantitative and qualitative nature are responsible for the observed effect. So again, a concession saying, yeah, we know you're going to say this, but let me anticipate this objection and say what's really up. So again, I recommend you practice being a naysayer yourselves. Talk to your advisors and say, can I review manuscripts with you or in your stead? To really feel what it is like to be a naysayer and say, but this is a weakness, but this is a weakness. Because in that position, you are being required by the journal to find not necessarily only reasons to reject, but things that need to be improved. You're becoming then, thus, a real member of the scientific community. Because then you're contributing to the improvement of a manuscript, not just the gatekeeper, but also the improvement of the way science is communicated. And in that position, you can practice being a naysayer. So I think it's a good way of doing that. Okay, so getting back to these common elements that we talked about earlier in today's class, we're going to talk about these now more in the context of how they can be used in order to signal not only limitations in your research, but also signal that you are coming to a close. So here is another passage from that same article about the meat odor. And here you can see that the authors, they point out a limitation. Can you find that? Can you find that? Basically, the first two sentences, they're talking about the limitation of their research. They say, well, at this point, it is not possible to say how long the meat content in food remains perceptible in auxiliary order, nor do we know how long one must consume meat to produce discernible changes in body odor. Moreover, we can only speculate about the already perceptible amount of meat consumed. So these are things that they don't know. It's a limitation. They don't know everything. The 2 weeks diet we chose for our study was based on results of an analytical study which found compounds of environmental origin and auxiliary odor after 10 days of hygienic and diet restrictions. And then they put here that yes, it's a limitation, but it is also, therefore, an opportunity to point out how they're contributing to future advancement of this field. So they say, future studies should address the question of diet duration or quantity of meat consumption and changes in body odor. Further, it should also be tested whether the observed effect is restricted to red meat or may be applied also to white meat, poultry, and fish. So this is nice. They're changing lemons into lemonade. It's a nice technique. Kind of parallel to what you do in introduction when you create a territory and then you create your own research niche, the move to. This is kind of in the same vein where you're talking about this is the unknown or this is the limitation, but here is an opportunity, a niche for future research. So, as I mentioned, there's even research about limitations in research, and this particular study, they looked at linguistically how do authors do that, and they focused on something called a hedge. We'll talk about that more in a minute. So a technique called hedging. So here they talk about the background. Acknowledgement of all serious limitations to research evidence is important for patient care and scientific progress. Formal research on biomedical authors acknowledge limitations is scarce, so saying that, acknowledging limitations is important for science, but there's not much research on it. Their objective is to assess the extent to which limitations are acknowledged in biomedical publications explicitly and implicitly by investigating the use of phrases that express uncertainty, so-called hedges, to assess the association between industry support and the extent of hedging. The design is, we analyze reporting of limitations and the use of hedges in 300 biomedical publications published in 30 high and medium-ranked journals in 2007. Hedges were assessed using linguistic software that assigned weights between 1 and 5 to each expression of uncertainty. So, in other words, a hedge is a kind of expression of uncertainty, not overstating your results, but maybe reducing or how do they put it? Expressing a degree of uncertainty. And we're going to see some examples of these. So, here is an unhedged, I always talk about rain. I don't know why I was talking about rain in Kurdish. Here is an unhedged statement. No hedging. Curitibanos have many umbrellas. This is because umbrellas are easily lost. Now, you can imagine if you were naysayers, you could say, well, wait a minute. That's not the only reason that they have umbrellas. It's because it rains a lot or because whatever. They like to collect umbrellas. I don't know. So, people who are aware of this objection that might be raised to a blanket statement like this, they hedge. Here is a hedge, right there. Curitibanos often may have many umbrellas because this here, I'm saying all Curitibanos. That can't be true. And if I'm a naysayer, I'm saying that's not true. Can't be true that all Curitibanos have many umbrellas. But here I'm saying Curitibanos often have many umbrellas. I'm hedging. This is because umbrellas are easily lost. All right, here's some more examples. See if you can identify in sentences 3, 4, and 5. Try to identify the hedges in those sentences. I'll give you 2 minutes. I don't know if there's research on this, the way Brazilians do this in Portuguese, but I'm sure that it's something that is done in Portuguese as well. And it's important to be aware of these techniques of this tool, this linguistic tool, because of the naysayer, but also because it's not something that you might think of without me pointing it out here. So the number 3, Kuritibanos have many umbrellas. This may be because umbrellas are easily lost. This reduces the expression of certainty. This is a hedge. It means that there might be more than one explanation. And this is something that will please a naysayer, or at least not make him raise his defenses. Kuritibanos are known to have many umbrellas. I'm not saying this is what they're known to have. This is because umbrellas can be easily lost. Kuritibanos have many umbrellas. This is likely due to the fact that umbrellas are easily lost. Likely. Probably, but not definitely. What do you think about these hedges? Are they important? Do you use them? Yeah, they are important, and you should be using them, and we're going to talk about how to use these now. So here's a definition of a hedge. Not just a word, it can also be a phrase. It's the hedging, an example of a hedge that is, or a word that is used, that is unhedged, that I see people use who are Portuguese speakers, is the word prove. And I think, I don't have any evidence for this, I'm hedging this statement. I think that the word comprovar is something that is not such a big deal in Portuguese. Esses dados comprovam blah, 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 whatever. And it doesn't seem to be a big deal. Journals, international journals, whose reviewers and editorial boards are not Portuguese speakers, often I've seen have a problem with this word because it sounds unhedged when you say this proves something. What do you mean it proves it? Often it can prove, but usually, especially in less exact sciences, it's something that you use other phrases like this suggests is a word, suggests, or a phrase like this provides evidence for, and so it can be a word or can be a phrase, and it is something that is something to show that you're being careful about the claims you are making. It's very common in academic writing. And they exist because of this guy here. So here is an example, again, from the meat odor study. Current knowledge allows us only to speculate what particular compounds and metabolic processes are responsible for hedonic changes in body odor after the meat consumption. Okay, so since they themselves admit that it's only speculation, already they have to be careful about the certainty with which they are making a statement after that. They're going to make a claim, and the claim is this. Oops. Well, actually, I should remind you what a claim is. That when you make an argument, often you have a claim and then you back that up with warranting. This is from some classes ago. Claim and then warranting, giving the evidence. So they do that here. And so they speculate, they use the word speculate, and so they make this claim here, this claim. We propose that it could be due to changes in amount and or relative abundance of aliphatic acids. They can't say, this is due to. They can't, because it's speculation. So they hedge. And they say, well, we propose that this could be due to. And then they go on. And they back up this claim with warrant. They warrant the claim by saying, this is why we believe it may be due to this. Because the axillary region contains abundant numbers of apocrine glands producing milky secretions, blah, 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 blah. So not only do they claim, but they warrant their claim. So they hedge the claim, and then they warrant it. Here are some common words and verbs that are used as hedges in academic English. You've seen these before. All of you have seen some of these, if not all of these before, but you may not have thought of them as hedges before. Many of you have learned this in basic English classes, like tomorrow it may rain, or in the future there could be robots cooking for us in the kitchen, whatever. You've learned this as a kind of modality, but not as a hedge. These may, can, could, might, possibly, likely, and then these words to do with effect. So let me show you how these work. Oh, and often with these verbs here, be and have. For example, since you guys have an election coming up, I thought this was appropriate to bring in. I suffered through my own election experience a couple of years ago. And I won't say who I was voting for, but it wasn't the person who won. And there was a lot of speculation after this about who or the causes of what contributed to that victory. And so let's look at an example combining, in this case, may, be, and cause. So, the unexpected result of the Trump victory may have been caused by an underestimation of Trump's popularity among mainstream media outlets. I can't say that it was caused by that. It's impossible to say that with certainty, but in discussing the results of the election, I can make this claim, and I could expand on that claim with other evidence, but I have to hedge it. Another example, this time using likely and the result of. Traditionally, Democratic states that voted more Republican in the election is likely the result of heavier campaigning by Trump. And this is actually a commonly cited factor that contributed to Trump's success, is that that Trump campaigned in states that were traditionally Democratic, and Hillary Clinton didn't bother. So she suffered the consequences of that. Now one that combines, this is just, you can combine different things. This one that combines possibly, have and be, and attribute. The lower voter turnout on election day is possibly attributable to ambivalent feeling towards Hillary Clinton among Democratic voters. They weren't excited about her very much, in many cases. There in the United States, it's not mandatory to vote. So, and here I could have substituted likely attributable or could have been attributable to. Another example, could have, be, and affect. So the mass influx of Syrian refugees at that time could have affected voter sentiment in favor of Trump. You need this have because it's in the past. All hedging. Another example, just using may. May and be and have. Or may and be. In future elections, it may be useful to verify emotional stability and cognitive functioning before allowing a president to run for president. Yeah, and would and plus seem plus suggest. So the result of the 2016 election would seem to suggest that a change in U.S. politics appears to be needed. So suggest and appear. All of these are all common examples of hedges. And you can see you can combine them in different ways. I'd like for you to give it a shot. So, but with different data. Here are the numbers for our class. This is the presencial class, and the numbers as represented by sectors. So here what you can see is that the Jurídica sector has very few people, as well as Litoral, SEPT, very few. But Biológicas had an extraordinary, comparatively speaking, large number of people represented in this class, as well as the Setor de Tecnologia. What are the causes of that? One could speculate. In other words, you could use a hedge to make a claim about why these two are so strongly represented in the class, or conversely, why law is so underrepresented. In the distance or the remote turma, you have Biológicas as well, again, coming out on top, but you also have a strong representation by Humanas in the remote one, and also technology. But again, SEPT very little, law very little. Here are the total numbers, and Biológicas wins. Tecnologia also comes in second place, but look at these guys. So, I would like you to just try, if you can, try to use the words that I've given you here. These here. Try to combine these hedges to make a statement about one of those numbers. See if you can make a statement, a claim, about the cause of maybe Biológicas being number one, or Jurídicas being so low, or Litoral being so low. Try to make a statement like that. Before I do that, the second one, closing, right? Yeah. The second attendance word for today is closing. Closing. And the way you should do that, just try to make a sentence about one of these numbers here. Send it here through this link on the slides. Just look at a couple of examples. Give yourself a chance to practice. Give you a couple minutes. While you guys are doing that, there's an interesting contribution here from student Jennifer. She tells a story about hedges. Says, em Congresso Nacional de Unidade de Conservação, Fernando Meirelles, director of Cidade de Deus, contou que estava produzindo filme sobre a importância da Amazônia para as chuvas no Brasil e que foi atrás de especialistas sobre o assunto. Ele queria depoimentos sobre como o desmatamento da Amazônia afetaria todo o regime de chuvas, impactando a segurança hídrica do sul e do sudeste do país. E ele não conseguiu um especialista para dizer isso, pois todos usavam termos como há evidências. Pode ser que estudos demonstram, possivelmente. Interesting. Okay, so here we have an example. the number of students from biologicals may be explained by the fact that they have a strong postgraduate program. That person who wrote that surely is from a postgraduate program in biologicals. This person's still stuck on the odor one. Oops. There may be greater, there's a little order issue here, but I think it was probably by accident. There may be greater pressure for production in English in the biological sector. Possibly, yeah. So there may be, it's a good hedge. The results can be related to the way they conduct the research. So since how and the way basically mean the same thing, I would just use the way. So results can be related to the way they conduct the research. The higher attendance is by biologicals. This may be due, it's very good, this may be due to the great interest in this area to communicate discoveries to society which could improve its health. Biologicals and Technologia may have more people enrolled due to the fact that these two post-graduation programs require more publications than other postgraduate programs. So may have good. A probable reason why biology students are a majority in the group is because of their need to publish scientific articles in English. Good. The high number of students from biology area may be related to the high number of courses in this area. Good. Most people are using may, that's fine. It's very good. So this is just for you to be aware of this, because it is very common in the discussion section. And I want you to be able to try that out. And it's a way that it's important to use this when you're concluding. It helps signal, the hedges also, they signal, and they also help signal that you are talking about something about which you don't feel that certain about. This idea of signaling things is important. I always remember when I first came to Brazil, I always had problems finishing telephone conversations because I didn't know how to signal that I was concluding or that I wanted to conclude. So when someone was talking to me on the phone, I would often just find myself just saying, you know, ciao or whatever. I wouldn't know how to signal that. And then I learned very quickly, that there's this really simple phrase in Portuguese, which is então tá. And there are many variations of this. Então tá bom, então tá joia, então tá... But just the core expression, então tá, is so useful because it signals that, okay, you need to leave, you need to hang up the phone. Sometimes people don't get it, but most people do. Então tá, you know, and then people, you know, okay, he's signaling that. And so in the discussion section, when you're trying to conclude, there are signals for that as well. It's important to signal that. So some questions that people ask, and you should ask yourselves when you're concluding is, first of all, should I have a separate section for conclusions? I have a discussion and a conclusion to follow, or have it all together, integrated into the discussion? How should I signal that I'm closing, and what should I include? First thing is, the first answer to that question is, check the journal that you're submitting to. So look at the articles published already by the journal that you're intending to submit to or that you will submit to, and look what other authors have done. Sometimes journals will strictly say, we want a separate conclusion section. We want those different, or other ones, it doesn't matter. But you should look at the way different journals do that. So for example, in this journal, with the American Journal of Medicine, a very famous journal, they have a separate conclusion section, almost always, or maybe always. And in this section, you can see how the authors are are signaling that they're ending. First of all, the word conclusion itself already says, okay, this is the conclusion, so you don't have to worry about that. But look what they do. They say medical non-adherence is an important public health issue, especially for patients taking OACs. Clinicians are currently ill-equipped to address these challenges with few simple tools to accurately identify patients with poor adherence. The VAS is a promising tool to help clinicians assess patient adherence that is quick, inexpensive, and easily implemented. So this is an application. They're saying this has practical applications, this VAS tool. And then they point to future directions, and they say future studies are needed to validate our findings and determine whether self-reported medication adherence can predict outcomes for patients taking anticoagulation and improve their safety. So this is a common way to finish an article, is to say future studies should do this. That's a very common way to finish, to conclude. This is an article that actually came through CAPA, I remember. Sevelamer reduces endothelial inflammatory response to advanced glycation end products. So it's a nephrology article. And they do something similar. In this journal, they seem to prefer a conclusion section. So conclusion says, okay, we're concluding. And they signal in conclusion, okay? And they include these elements. They say that this study demonstrates in vitro that the anti-inflammatory effects of sevelamer on endothelial cells and monocytes may be due not only to its classic effect on phosphate, but also its binding capacity to AGEs and possibly other uremic toxins. Might be considered a therapeutic option, so they're the, again, a practical application to reduce high AGE levels and observed in pathological conditions such as CKD and perhaps diabetes. And then again, pointing to the future. In the future, clinical studies should be designed to validate the potential capacity of sevelamer to decrease systemic AGEs and uremic serum concentrations. Thus, it is hypothesized that this clinical treatment could provide a beneficial effect on vascular function, yielding relevant clinical outcomes. Talking about future and future applications. So a common way of finishing is talking about future and future applications. Notice also that they are very careful about the way they say this, because they're talking about a hypothesized application. They can't say that it will work. So they use all these hedges. May, possibly, might, perhaps, could. That doesn't weaken their study. It's just being careful, because they don't want to overstate the significance or the importance of their work. Here's an article from the area of food quality, food chemistry. And here they have a conclusion section, but as in some journals, and this is why I say you have to look at the journal that you're submitting to, some journals, they want this. They want a bullet-pointed conclusion. And so in some ways it can actually be easier to write this way. And I've seen this in engineering, I've seen this in the biomedical sciences, I've seen this in chemistry. Some journals, they want these bullet points. So, be aware of that. But also the same thing applies. They go back to points that were raised in the introduction, earlier research, and they expand on this. And again, even though it's bullet points, there are hedges. So the breakdown path may be determined by the mechanical actions employed. In this case, they were talking about how many times you need to chew a cookie. It's something like that. May use different markers. May. Again, hedging, I hope now that I've talked about hedging that you become more aware of it in all the articles that you read. Can the discussion and the conclusion be integrated if it's not required by the journal to separate it? Yes, of course. And you have examples of this. But one thing is that just to be aware that you should clearly have in your discussion and conclusion section these ingredients, including the limitations. So here you have it signaled in conclusion. This is the discussion section, discussion and conclusion combined. They signal in conclusion, that's good. And in that conclusion, they talk about the limitations, and they do that thing where they talk about how the limitations open an opportunity for more research. So they say, that reporting of limitations to original biomedical research is probably incomplete, either directly through clinical decision-making by evidence-based clinicians or indirectly through its effects on systematic reviews and clinical guidelines. Optimal patient care may be jeopardized. Finally, another signal here, finishing. Scientific progress may be slowed down. Reporting limitations more completely would aid the design and implementation of future studies. An appropriate amount of hedging, given these limitations, could further guide future scientific inquiry. Another example here of a combined discussion and conclusion section. Here they conclude by simply saying, in conclusion, they signal that an increase in these cells, coupled with a decrease in CD3 cells, was observed in blah, blah, blah. And again, this is going back to the recapping the findings, but also talking about applications. So future directions, applications, a good way to finish. This suggests that the IL-17A pathway may play an important role in PPPP pathogenesis. I don't know if you remember this one with the iguanas. Again, they have a discussion and conclusion section that is combined, and they signal with overall, this little discourse marker here, and they finish with this application. So, this good news should be tempered with the potential that the tourist-exposed iguana's long-term survival may be compromised since their lowered corticosterone response to a stressful stimulus may limit the beneficial effects of accurate corticosterone release. So not only are they talking about a limitation, but they're talking about here that there is good news with this, but the effects may be limited. And then finally, here's an article from a journal of autism about theory of mind, and they don't signal here. They don't signal with in conclusion or in summary or anything like that. However, they do so here. So at least there's somewhere in this paragraph where they're signaling, okay, now we're closing, now we're finishing. And they do so by pointing to the future. So in a related vein, this study supports the notion that patients are sensitive to the relationship of mentalizing ability to social functioning in their children with ASDs. In summary, we propose the continued and expanded use of theory of mind instruments and research settings to advance its potential for clinical application. So it's actually both of these things. Very common way of finishing, whether it be a separate conclusion section or a summary and conclusion, or rather a discussion and conclusion section combined. All right, I think you get the idea. So whether you have a discussion and conclusion combined or conclusion section only. These are common elements that you should be aware of now and include in them. Oops, it's in Portuguese. All right, now, as I mentioned before at the beginning of class, next week there is no class, so that you have time to write. What are you going to do? You should write your draft. Notice I've written this in bold and italic and underlined because this is a draft. That means, how do you say draft in Portuguese? It's rascunho. It's just a rascunho, what we call scrap paper, you call papel rascunho. You can throw this away. It's just a rascunho. Don't look at this as the article you're going to submit to the journal. This is an article that you're going to receive feedback on by your peers. So you should write a draft discussion and conclusion if you can. If you feel that you can, if you have partial results, even if you have a little bit of results, you can already start writing a discussion or even conclusion section. If not, that's okay too. And you're going to write this, please, on what's called the peer feedback submission form. This is online. Yeah. Yes, I'm going to show them. Yeah. And remember to use hedging if you can, if it's appropriate. So, by the next class, which is the 31st, you will submit this paper on this form to this email address with the subject draft article. On this date, you will receive further instructions about what to do, what's going to happen after that. I'm not going to talk about it now, we'll talk about it then. You're not going to receive points. I mean, you will receive points, but you're not going to receive a grade. This is not, you're not going to get an A, B, C, or D for this draft. This will count towards your participation grade. So we will check that you have done it, just because we feel it's a valuable experience for you. But you don't have to worry about, I'm not sure about this. I want you to take that pressure off of you. This is not for you to be formally evaluated in terms of grade. This is a process. This is part of you, the process of writing the article. As I mentioned, you should do this on the peer feedback submission form. This is on our webpage. So if you go to our class page, at the very top, or near the top, here, you should be able to download that. And when you open it, you'll see that you have a space for your name and your date and email. Especially your name and your email are really, really important. You must put your name here. And then you can write your title here. It's a title for your article, working title. And you also have a space for what's called contextualization. So here, in this space, you can say, okay, well, dear reviewer, I have already have an introduction, and I only have partial results, so I'm only writing a little bit of the discussion. This is, could you please give me feedback on, is it clear? Or if you think I am being too confident in my discussion of the results, or whatever. So this is a space for you to explain the background of your study, explain what you hope to achieve with the article, anything about the sections, whatever. Then you'll write your article here or paste it here. And then later, a couple weeks from now, you'll receive comments from other people, either the Turma Virtual or from here on your paper. So do be careful to download this form and put your name on it, before you submit, and submit to the email. And that's it. So keep calm and write on. Good luck to you, and I'll see you on Halloween.